Hello and welcome to Upfront. I am Kang Tae-ri. The latest Ebola outbreak in West Africa was first reported about a year ago, and it's become the deadliest occurrence of this disease since its first discovery in the 70s. On today's Upfront, we discuss the lessons to be learned from this latest outbreak and remaining challenges. And as always, we have a great panel of guests. First up, to my left, Mr. Shin Dong-ik, Deputy Minister for Multilateral and Global Affairs from the Foreign Affairs Ministry. Welcome to our studio.
Thank you, my pleasure.
And Professor Ko Gi-sung from College of Medicine at Chung-Ang University. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And Mr. Oliver Yoon, Director of Communications from Doctors Without Borders Korea. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jetty.
And before we get started, let's take a look at this next report to check on the current status of this outbreak and to check on this, the response of the international community.
In March 2014, the Ebola virus was confirmed in a Guinean patient exhibiting symptoms of fever, nausea, and diarrhea. Ebola is a severe infection that induces systemic hemorrhage and high fever with a fatality rate of more than 60%. There is yet to be a treatment developed for the virus. The Ebola outbreak has been mostly concentrated in the three Western African countries of Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. On March 12th, the World Health Organization announced that the cumulative death toll from Ebola had exceeded 10,000. This has been the largest Ebola epidemic in history. And as it continues to spread to other regions aside from West Africa, the fear of Ebola has been expanded worldwide. With medical workers from around the world participating in relief missions, Korea also decided to dispatch medical teams.
한국은 여러 나라로 확산되고 있는 에볼라 바이러스 대응을 위해 인도적 지원을 제공한 데 이어 보건 인력을 파견하기로 결정하였습니다.
Sierra Leone was selected as a destination for the Korean medical teams. 24 medical workers, including doctors and nurses, were dispatched in 3 teams and conducted relief efforts to prevent the further expansion of Ebola. The 3rd medical team returned on March 23rd, wrapping up Korea's medical relief efforts against Ebola. Still, the global fight against the viral outbreak continues. It's been a year since the first outbreak of Ebola, and on today's Upfront, we discuss issues such as efforts in medical relief and vaccine development, the reconstruction of West Africa, as well as a plan for the post-Ebola era.
Let's first talk about Korea's involvement in all this. Mr. Shin, Korea has dispatched 3 different teams, a total of more than 20 medical workers. I mean, there are countries who've sent financial and equipment support, but there are only 15 countries around the world who have sent a medical response team. What meaning do you give to this?
I think this is a very special meaning because Korea sends first ever our professional medical relief team to the overseas, particularly in African region. And as you mentioned, most of the countries are from European and advanced countries. Only 2 countries in Asia, Korea and China, send our medical team to the affected countries. And we contribute more than $12 million to fight against the Ebola disease. But in addition, this has additional significance to send a professional medical team. We believe this dispatchment contribute enhancing our brand image as a constructive middle power to the outside. At the same time, we had the great opportunity to strengthen our capability to fight these epidemics internally and externally.
So now let's talk about what this team might have gone through. I mean, I can just only use my imagination here. Maybe I want to ask Professor Ko here. A lot of medical workers in West Africa, it's a very complicated process they have to go through. It's sort of a combo of detective work there and a sort of a military element that are involved to get the safety measures right. Do tell us more about these complicated processes that they have to go through in order to prevent secondary infections.
Well, perhaps you might have the two different way to prevent of secondary infection through two aspects. The first one is medical device, and second one is medical technology. Well, as you mentioned, it must have been a very tough job to control Ebola virus infections because this virus is highly contagious virus which infect person to person via direct contact through fluid from the patient. So although it is important for medical workers to equip with PPE, so-called personal protective equipment. This PPE contain mask and cap and even apron. So this is very complicated process for wearing, so-called donning, and taking off, so-called doffing we call. And during this donning and doffing process, there is a lot of case of secondary infections from contaminated PPE. So we have to design the better PPE equipment with adding like the cooling system for a long time period working. And then secondly, it should be easy to wearing and taking off. And then last things, we need cost-efficient production system of the PPE. So there is the main point that we have to mention. And then second point is the medical technology should be considered for prevention and diagnosis and treatment. For the, of course, prevention, we need proper vaccine development with the cheapest way. And then second one is prevention. We don't have really efficient diagnosis protocol, which can be applied at the epicenter of the West Africa, because always we send the blood to America or the Germany, very expensive. And for the last point, I think we need better treatments like biomedicine and drugs. Well, let's talk about the ZMapp. The ZMapp is cocktail anti-Ebola virus antibody produced from the tobacco plant, which is developed in United States. Well, unfortunately, we don't have such a vaccine and antibody in Korea. So the Korean government must have organized and operate the R&D program for PPE development and vaccine and therapeutic antibody productions in Korea, together with the university institution and private sector, like a biopharmaceutical company together, for sure.
Well, I would like to actually touch on each point that you've just made in detail later on. And Mr. Yoon, what would you say was the biggest challenge in containing this virus this time around?
Yeah, for Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, really the biggest challenge and the most difficult part of responding to this unprecedented outbreak was twofold, and they were connected. First was just the human impact that it had, the human cost in terms of having such a high death rate. We were seeing when we first responded back in early last year, death rates over 70%, and we were able to get it down to 60 and finally down to about 50% in terms of the death rate. But we're still talking about a 50-50 chance of dying if you're infected, which is way too high. So because this disease was killing so many people so quickly, and the infectiousness of it was so dire, it actually really stretched MSF, Doctors Without Borders, to our limits, even beyond our limits. And so this is kind of the main challenges that we faced. And when I spoke with our 2 Korean nationals who actually went with MSF to go treat Ebola in Sierra Leone, both of them, I asked them the same question. What was their biggest challenge? What was most difficult for them? And they both had the exact same answer, which was, for them, the most difficult thing was to see so many of their patients die. And so that just shows you kind of what was so difficult about this terrible epidemic.
So, I mean, there were concerns. I mean, it's a good thing that Korea was able to give this kind of help, financial and also medical relief there. But there were concerns. What's your take? I mean, some were saying this could actually lead to a potential national security matter.
That's correct. At the initial stage when the Ebola outbreak, so there is a fear and some kind of phobia among the public. So, for example, when we tried to host an international conference, the public and our province, they strongly refused to accept the people coming from those countries, particularly 3 affected countries. But some of their concerns are baseless and very based on the rumors and speculations. So we try to give full information and correct status of the situation in those countries. Finally, so we noticed that the people understand the importance of our assistance to those countries. And it was surprising that when we try to recruit the members of medical team, there's a very high competitions. When there's opening only 10, 15, there's more than 150 volunteers try to get a job. And whenever we send our teams to Sierra Leone, I was in the airport to encourage them and cheer up those peoples, but it was very sweet. So family members who were there together with their other members who are going to be in Africa, they're very brave. I mean, encourage those members to contribute to our very noble goals and our ideas to fight against this dangerous, the common enemy. And this is heartbreaking sometimes. But inadvertently, in other parts of the Korean Peninsula, the North Korea, they shut down their borders for several months. This is the reality, how both Koreas face the threat from the Ebola epidemics.
Exactly. I mean, that fear factor, I think, comes from, in a lot of cases, uncertainty, not knowing enough about this, and that's why you're saying that you try to educate some of these entities about this disease. Now, was Korea ready to adequately counter a potential spread of the virus if we were to have secondary infections in Korea? That's the question that I would like to throw out there, because there are a lot of questions and doubts in the beginning. Anybody?
Well, as I mentioned, in Korea, we don't have any drugs and the vaccine for prevention targeting Ebola virus infections. So in case of Ebola enter to the Korea, there's no therapy for that person, unfortunately. And then furthermore, Korea is a very dense population country compared to with a small territory. So a transmission rate might be very rapid than other countries. So we can learn some lesson from Nigeria case, because Nigeria is much closer to epicenter of the West Africa in 2014. Well, yet even after Ebola entered to Nigeria, Nigeria government quickly responds to that the protections, so-called contact tracing protocol.
Contact tracing.
Yes, exactly.
That's the detective work I was talking about, I guess.
So the contact tracing protocol to limit widespreading transmission of Ebola viruses. It was very efficient. So Nigeria didn't get only, I mean, just Nigeria got only 19 cases of infection for whole whole Ebola outbreak period. Yes.
And when there was an incident, unfortunately, but fortunately that, this medical worker is okay now, but there was an incident where one of the Korean relief team members was actually pricked by a needle. But what impressed me the most about the whole process of dealing with this potential chaos for the team was the process of evacuating this member, airlifting this person to Germany and all that. So there we go, the military element, right?
Yeah, if I can comment on that, for Doctors Without Borders, because of this this unprecedented outbreak, and because it was so huge and so out of control, we actually took the very, very rare step of calling for some both civilian and military medical biohazard assets to be deployed to fight Ebola. This is something we usually do not do. We're non-political, we're non-governmental. We try to stay as independent. We always stay independent and impartial. But because this got so out of control and so huge, there was no way we can handle it ourselves, or even with a handful of other NGOs. It had to have the international community and government step in, and we needed some military medical assets to come in, and that's eventually what happened. A little slow, but we did get there was some support that did come in. Yeah.
Exactly. And all this experience of having sent a team, there are 3 teams actually, to this West African region, it's going to be a great asset for Korea. In terms of dealing with, God forbid, outbreaks of swine flu, other flus, or SARS. It's going to be a great asset down the road for Korea, right?
That's correct. We have a lot of lessons and experience, and the evacuation. That issue was our #1 priority. When we had the case of our teams was affected by the Ebola, how to evacuate from the site. So we invest a lot of times to prepare that contingency plan. So one word, concerted efforts worked when we had one case. So a member of our teams was pricked by the needle. So we signed the MOU with United Kingdom, who is co-sponsoring that ETC, and together with the United States, they're providing the air ambulance. The Phoenix Airlines, they have a special airplanes to bring the patients to the hospitals in European countries. And this means so well-organized the manual for emergency evaluations work. And this is a hybrid. It's combined efforts and many multi-countries endeavors. Successfully, we evacuated our team to the Germany hospital using U.S. airlines, and with full cooperation from United Nations. The head of the United Nations Secretariat is our Korean Ban Ki-moon. So he gave us, so we cannot say publicly, but gave assistance when we evacuate our teams to safely. And he's now, I can say he or she, but members is now very well. And this is a good example. Additionally, many assets we can share for the future activities. So we have more than 20 members of medical teams, and many officers in Foreign Ministry, Health Ministry, Defense Ministry. They have more than 5 or 6 months experience to prepare those activities. So this will be remembered together with their records. So we'll prepare the very comprehensive report called White Paper on Ebola activities in Africa. So this is a very milestone event, and as you mentioned, it's a great asset for our health diplomacy and health work for the international community.
That's great. So that accumulation of knowledge and know-how there could help future endeavors if, God forbid, anything happens. Now, we are discussing the relief mission of Korea's medical response team in West Africa. And at this point, I would like to take a look at the scenes of the Korean medical workers in Africa in this global fight against the deadly virus. So let's talk about where we are now. It started about a year ago. Are Ebola cases leveling off? Have we turned the tide at this point?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think one thing that we need to be clear about is that the Ebola epidemic is still ongoing. It's not over yet, but cases have decreased and have come down. So one of the things that needs to be done, and we've reflected on this in a new report we had this week that came out, kind of marking this 1 year point of the Ebola outbreak. And one of the things that we're really emphasizing is what you brought up and explained well, is the point of contact tracing. We really need to, in order to get down to zero, we really need to identify every single person who's been in contact with someone with Ebola. And then once we can do that with the surveillance and kind of watchdogging, making sure that the cases are kept under control, then we can get down to zero. But we're not there yet.
And, you know, speaking of talking about the global fight against Ebola, we just cannot not talk about the vaccines that we would need. And Professor Ko briefly mentioned that topic as well. Why didn't we develop the vaccines before this outbreak? I mean, is it that we didn't choose to because there isn't a big enough of a market there, or we were not able to, we were not capable of developing the necessary vaccines? Professor Ko.
Let me introduce, some quotation of Margaret Chan, Director General of the WHO. I mean, she pointed out so-called the rich get the best care, the poor are left to die. Well, we have to change. I mean, it's time to change because we need cheap vaccine and antibody production system. To do that, I think we need some kind of very quick response to organize this, private sector and then government. We need a governance to raise the funding for development of vaccine and antibodies. Sooner or later, we have the properly working the vaccine and the therapeutic antibodies for the prevention and treatment.
How is the discussion going in terms of the vaccine development on the diplomatic front?
If I may explain about the situation in those countries.
Sure.
So economic front. Yeah, the death toll is now definitely decreasing, but the final goal is getting Ebola to zero. The zero case is almost impossible. There's some cases now, the new outbreaks is now through using from to sea lane, maybe the villages in the coastal area. So that was sometimes contaminated by the Ebola, the virus, through the sea.
Sure.
So the boats or the fishermen, they bring the case again. So that situation of the economy, those countries, the economic size was shrunk by 12%. And also the total, the cost of their loss in economic terms is, we estimate more than $20 billion US. So we need to concentrate, now focus on the rebuild their societies and countries in many areas, including the food security, and rebuild the health system, and how to reopen their school and provide more the appropriate education. So we have to make their own system, the bringing their health workers and local workers. And Korea is now trying to contribute through KOICA to provide training and education, together with the participating in international efforts to rebuild their countries.
Mr. Shin was talking about how damaged these economies were. I mean, for example, Sierra Leone, the World Bank is now expecting 4% of growth for last year, and minus 2% for 2015, when this economy was supposed to grow, more than 11% last year. So, what's the pulse check that Doctors Without Borders is getting on these economies in terms of rebuilding itself and sort of protecting itself from I don't know, containing this outbreak and future?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I mean, it's a real important question, but it's kind of, I mean, I'm not an economist. We don't really have economists we're not Economists Without Borders or Doctors Without Borders, but it's a real kind of question that we leave to kind of the World Bank and IMF and others to try to figure these out. But for us, really, the economic impact is tied directly to the social impact. You know, the impact that it has on these healthcare systems that are very weak to begin with, and then you have something like Ebola happen, and it just collapses the healthcare system. And so now you have people dying not just from Ebola, but also malaria and measles and things like that. So in order to strengthen those healthcare systems in the long run, which would help then prevent a future outbreak, is where the economic impact comes in. How do we provide the funding? How do we provide the economic base for them to be able to strengthen their health systems and have coordination so that something like this can be avoided in the future.
All right, now we are discussing the expected challenges accompanying this latest Ebola outbreak. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the need to garner more international support for the issue. Now, aside from the absence of vaccine or, adequate medicine for the outbreak of Ebola in West Africa, some people have criticized the response of the World Health Organization to begin with. And I wonder what brought that on, because that's the organization that is supposed to be in charge of global health issues.
Well, I think speed is very essential, because the global response to Ebola virus was very slow last year. So it would be smart to begin think of more flexible and effective organization or system for quickly response to Ebola outbreak and any other suspicious infectious disease, like, together with the capability for surveillance and early warning and rapid diagnosis and treatment. Well, I do agree with Professor Payet, one of Belgian biologists, found the Ebola virus.
Yes.
First in 1976, I guess. He believed that there is something need for new health security services, agency to guard against pandemic disease like Ebola virus. So I think it is time to organize a well-trained corps of people, maybe like together with the Doctor Without Borders, who are globally experienced and deployable and specialist outbreak control. So I think we can think about that kind of organization.
Well, but just to speak from the other side of this table, just to get that balance going here, I mean, there was the mystery as to how this epidemic began to begin with. So there was a limit as to how fast, how speedy the World Health Organization can jump in and do its thing.
I mean, that's true, yeah. I mean, it was kind of a perfect storm of things happening in terms of this disease. First of all, had never been seen in West Africa before, like you said. And it kind of was at this confluence of where three countries came together, this border area, so it was able to spread to 3 countries. But that being said, it is true, though, that the World Health Organization, WHO, was late to respond, because the Ministry of Health of Guinea first reported a declaration of this outbreak in this week last year, so it's been a year later now. But then the WHO did not declare it an international public health emergency until August, so it was over 5 months later. And so there was kind of this vacuum of leadership in terms of someone coming in and being able to coordinate all of this, and really the WHO should have stepped in there. But it's also not just the WHO. It was kind of, there was inaction and kind of almost a global, I would say, paralysis of the entire international community.
Why was that then? Speaking from your capacity.
I mean, this is the question we ask, and this is maybe one of the questions why we exist, is because when others don't respond or don't want to go there, don't care whether the people are because they're poor or there's nothing, they're marginalized, or it's too difficult or whatever it is, that's when we try to go. But something like this got to a scale that we just cannot handle ourselves, and it was really something that the entire international community had to step in on.
I think the reason is it was a very new one. We never experienced it before. So, you know, the malaria we had in the past, and the avian influenza, and also a lot of the diseases, epidemics or pandemics, we knew each other. But this is first one. So some criticism against the WHO. So it's agreeable, but in one sense, it's not so fair.
Yeah. But it's new in the sense that of the scale. But we've been treating, MSF has been treating Ebola going back to the 90s. I mean, we've been treating it in Congo, and mainly it used to be seen only in Central Africa. But those outbreaks tended to be very short-lived, only months at a time, and we're only talking tens, hundreds of patients, and that's it, if that.
Supporting that WHO this time as 3 major countries, the United States, UK, and France, they played a critical role, covering one by one. So
right, but for us it was too late.
Too late.
It was actually came quite late. It came when the cases started coming down, and that stuff should have been mobilized back when the emergencies were still being when they were being declared by the countries.
And when the WHO decided to step in here, a concerted effort by an army of international experts to help contain this virus, and I mean, Ebola headlines were just hogging all news agencies and our headlines as well, at Arirang News as well. So then, is it fair that it's just so difficult when we are at that point of an outbreak that it's so difficult to contain it?
I mean, it's hard to say what's fair and unfair in something like this, because it was, again, on such a grand scale, and so much was needed internationally that, yes, it was more than just WHO, absolutely. But you could see kind of the failure of where WHO came in when you saw something like Ban Ki-moon with the UN make it a UN Security Council issue, and in fact started a brand new response team called UNMIR, which was actually the first time the Security Council addressed an emergency health issue. So it became something at the UN level. So the question could be, did WHO fail, or was it something that had to be pushed up to the UN? Who knows? But either way, there was a collective international, I would say, kind of failure to handle this. And I think it's a real lesson learned for the international community.
And Professor Ko was briefly talking about what Professor Peter Pyatt from London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, that's quite a mouthful there. The biggest takeaway that you are trying to highlight is the importance of sort of like, take this as a wake-up call to talk about potential investment in universal health care system, a robust health system. So do elaborate. I mean, how do you view the current prevention system? And I think I can guess your answer, not enough, we're lacking, it's inadequate. But do elaborate.
Well, as I mentioned, the Professor Pyatt cases, I mean, his opinions. Well, WHO organization, I think, is pretty much very big, which cannot really quickly respond to such very, highly contagious virus. I mean, sudden, impact on certain places.
Sure.
And then that's why I think we need some kind of, Doctor Without Borders, or the doctor, the Pyatts mentioned that I think we need some kind of well-trained corps of people, I mean, experienced people with such, this kind of outbreak experience, and then quickly deploy to the certain place where the outbreak occur. So I don't know, WHO has that kind of the ability or the capability at this moment, because we know that the last year WHO was really inefficient, acting organization. So maybe this is, my, the opinion and suggestion.
What does the latest report from Doctors Without Borders say? How does it comment on the universal healthcare system?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we basically say the same thing you just said in our report, which is it is a wake-up call. And we say basically what we need is kind of a reboot of these healthcare systems. They were already weak to begin with in West Africa, in Sierra Leone, in Guinea, in Liberia. They had weak healthcare systems, and they just did not have the support, the public health kind of infrastructure that was needed. So when you had something like Ebola come in, it just completely flattened it. So now what we need to do is really kind of rebuild it again, and it is a wake-up call for us, not just us, MSF, but us as international community, as the WHO, as others, to support these countries, and not just the ones in West Africa, but countries in Central Africa, in South Africa, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, places like that, where the needs are high, and also in places where you see things like not just disease epidemics, but natural disasters, or especially conflict. Places like the Middle East with Syria right now, or Ukraine. These are places where the healthcare systems need to be strengthened, so that when you have these kind of negative impact things happen, like a disease outbreak or warfare, that the healthcare system can actually handle that and be able to provide for the civilians who are caught in these terrible predicaments.
In terms of rebooting the global health care system, what would be some of the recommendations that your organization can make, or does it make in this report? Or
we don't make specific recommendations, because again, we're an emergency medical aid organization, so we go in where the needs are most acute, most rapidly needed, and we go in, and then when it's over, we go somewhere else. Our main goal is to put ourselves out of business, hopefully, but that's a long time coming. When it comes to, as you're saying, these kind of higher level, what needs to be done for these countries, for their national healthcare systems, those are questions for the WHO, those are questions for the funding from World Bank or places like that. Those are the questions that kind of have to be coordinated from the government level.
Exactly, and this is a diplomatic, this is a matter that could be discussed more heavily or more actively on the diplomatic front. I mean, just from your description of how this Korean medical worker was evacuated from West Africa to Germany, I mean, that took some global effort.
Right.
So do you think this latest outbreak of Ebola helped the diplomatic community to sort of wake up to this importance of a global healthcare system, or the improvement of it?
Yeah, that's right. So as Mr. Yoon mentioned, there's a lot of cases of the regional conflicts in Syria, Iraq, South Sudan. But once this outbreak of the Ebola cases, so United Nations as a whole placed the #1 top priority, the resolving these issues about Ebola. So as I said, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon appointed his special envoy to mainly handling these cases together with WHO, because the WHO had tumbled and they believed they had mistake. But they did a lot of works after they admitted some the mistakes. But we received a lot of the praise and compliments from the countries in Africa. So when I was at Addis Ababa for the different meetings, the foreign minister of Sierra Leone, he requested to meet personally. So I was there, and he told me to convey his special thanks to the people of the Korea and the government of Korea. And we shook hands, and together with other people. So, but I was quite hesitating whether it is okay to shake hands with people from Sierra Leone.
Oh, there we go.
But we did it well. And other United Kingdom and European Union also, they recognized Korea as a new global partner, working together. Even Africa is far away from the Korean Peninsula, but Korea is now very courageous new partner to address the many issues. So based on this experience and the diplomatic front, Korea always can be and belong to the core groups whenever new challenge and new threat. So Korea is one of the leading countries to address together, and with the principle of the pursuing our global happiness in our policy agenda.
Okay.
Yes, as you mentioned, so I believe that the Korea quick response to Ebola outbreak at this time, I mean the last year, I think it's very much meaningful to show Korea is a global member. I mean, just not
Right.
global member, just good global member of international society,
Right.
and then which is always ready for sending something, the corpse or the help to the, the place where the help needed. Because I think the world is not just the world anymore. The world is changing. I think the world is now different from the past. Because world is composed of international society. I mean, many countries. So I think it's Korea this time did the right action.
And we are getting close to the end of our discussion today. But I want to ask you, Mr. Yoon, I mean, the media attention is sort of dying down in terms of covering the Ebola outbreak and what's happening in West Africa. What do you think will get us to the end game?
I think it's quite a few things. Really what we have to do is kind of realize, take the lessons learned of seeing these kind of global failures that we saw in terms of the response, the lateness, and seeing how they got exposed and how do we address that. So, I think one of the things is that we do need to have this international coordination by health bodies, international health bodies, to be able to address what needs to be done in these countries, to then be able to strengthen the health infrastructure, the health systems in these countries so that they can withstand these type of epidemics. In addition to that, we need, as we discussed earlier, more R&D. We need more research and development for new drugs, new vaccines, so we can fight a disease like this and prevent it in the future, so that when something like this does happen, we say people have been vaccinated, so it really keeps it from spreading, or you have drugs that can treat it very quickly and rid the patients of these diseases. I think that is the end game, but it's all, I think, kind of, in the sphere of knowing that in the end it's about lives, and we have to kind of reflect on the fact that a year later we've over 10,000 people died from this Ebola epidemic. I mean, that would be like tomorrow waking up and your entire neighborhood here, wherever you live, is wiped out because of this disease, and it not just killed those people, but it really affected those families and those communities. So I think one way for us to look at this is, to ask ourselves a question: what if this were to happen in Korea and Sierra Leone was going to come help us? What if myself, my loved ones, my community, and my people were getting infected and we're getting scared and we're dying off? What would we want? Would we want the world to respond to us? And I think the answer is yes. And so that now we have to really answer now, how do we implement that? How do we answer that question in an effective way?
Okay, and Professor Ko, your final word of advice to the governments out there, for Korea or for our viewers?
Well, I would like to give one sentence,
Sure.
which is the rich prepared country get the best safe and care. The poorly prepared country are left to die or behind. Very strong, the sentence word. Well, but I would like to say two things more. One is the healthcare system, of course, should be established properly, and then strong R&D program for Ebola virus and other potential future infectious disease. So we have to establish precise public health system and then R&D program. So the Korean government, including private sectors like a big pharma in Korea, and then also governmental, the research institute, of course, university like me, should invest research for Ebola virus, vaccine, drugs, and medicines like antibodies for the future. So let's make a better world. Yeah.
Let's make a better world. And Mr. Shin, your closing remark in terms of making the world better.
Yes, Korea's contribution was, as Dr. Go mentioned, is very unique and very exceptional. But you know, our Korean peacekeeping operation team, PKO, was excellent, is admired by many countries. But this team, the Korean medical team, was also highly evaluated and praised by many other countries. Right. So we are proud of them, and our third team already arrived. So we have to give them a big applause and compliments to appreciate their noble efforts. And next, what to do? I think healthcare system, the Orange program, and Mr. Yoon mentioned that we need to strengthen and build up our capability. But one more thing that we have to, cannot forget is KDRT, Korean Disaster Relief Team. So far we have concentrated on disaster relief, for example, typhoon or an earthquake. But this is a new area, the cooperation of the medical, the crisis. We need to give them the more financial capability and the organizations. So we'll consult with our relevant ministry and agencies to build new system. Vaccine, we have to invent more. All in all, this is a milestone event, very new and creative effort to enhance our capability for the humanitarian diplomacy. And we have to thank those people who were there in site, in the field. And at the same time, we have to give special thanks to all the people of Korean people. Now they understand the importance, and from now on, if there's another cases, our people are ready to support and help them, those countries in affected area.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, all three of you, for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that will do it for this week's Upfront Conversation. Thanks for joining our conversation today, and you're also welcome to engage in this discussion online as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.